Hello everyone, welcome back to another Unreal-based tutorial. In this lesson, we're going to be discussing variables. Did you ever wonder how a game remembers how much gold you have or whether a door is locked? It's all thanks to variables. Today we're cracking open Unreal Engine blueprints to learn how to store and use them. So what exactly is a variable? Well, when you're building logic in blueprints, you need to store data, whether it's the player's health, their name, or where they're standing in the world. We do this using variables. And every variable has a specific type that defines what kind of data it can hold. Think of it like organizing your game's memory into different labeled containers. Let's look at some of the most common ones you'll use. So first, we have booleans. You'll recognize these by their red color in Unreal. Booleans are pretty simple. They're either true or false. You use them for switches like is the door open, is the player jumping. Next, we have integers, which are cyan colored. They're for whole numbers, so no decimals allowed. If you're counting something that doesn't split, like player score or ammo count, you can use integers. Thirdly, and in green, we have floats. Floats are also numbers, but they can also include decimals. These are essential for continuous values, like player's health, which might be 75.5, or movement speed. Fourth, we have strings that are usually identified as magenta. These store a sequence of text characters, so if you need to save or display names, messages, or text labels like player name or dialogue, you use a string variable. And then moving to the final type that we use a lot are vectors, which are yellow, and a vector is slightly different because it packages three floating values together, specifically representing the x, y, and z coordinates. This is the main type you'll use for 3D coordinates, telling the game exactly where the object is located or which direction it's facing in the world. Now that we have a basic understanding of what a variable is and just a few of the data types, let's jump over to Unreal and create our first variable. Here we are in the project that we created earlier. Now to understand variables, they're used in conjunction with something called a blueprint. Let's go ahead and create our first blueprint. Down in the left-hand corner, you'll find your content browser. Now if you don't see it here, you might have to click this content drawer button. Mine is already docked. Now let's say your content browser is not docked. You can click on your content drawer here, and then you can click in Dock and Layout. And that'll dock it at the bottom, just like mine. Alright, so in our content browser, let's go ahead and, in our content folder here, right-click and create a new folder. Let's call this one Blueprints. Within this, we're going to create our first blueprint, which is an actor. Right-click, go to Blueprint Class, and select it. Now what you'll notice here is a bunch of different blueprint types. For now, we're just going to focus on the first one, which is an actor. An actor is an object that can be placed or spawned in the world. You can see there's different other types. There's a pawn, there's the character class, blueprint class. For now, I want you to think of these as almost like little prefabs or holders that we can combine different components together to make things like characters and stuff like that. Right now, that's probably coming off like word salad, but don't worry about it. As we begin to build these out, it'll become a lot more clear. For now, let's just focus on actors and then a little bit about how blueprints work. Select the actor and type BP, which stands for blueprint rather, underscore, and then my first BP, and that'll stand for my first blueprint. And go ahead and hit enter. Go ahead and double click it. Now I'm going to go ahead and grab this and I'm going to dock it in my scene. And as I mentioned before, it's sort of an empty component or empty prefab. And off on the left hand side you can see there's a section called components. So for example, if I hit add here and I want to add a static mesh, I can add a static mesh component and then I can select from some of the predefined static meshes. So for example, there's a cube here and you can see it appears in our scene. And if I save this and I go back to my level and I drag this in, you can see there's that cube that we just created. If I go in here and I delete this and I compile and save this and I go back into my level, you can see it deleted that static mesh. So this is how you would build things like animated doors and characters and so forth. But how do we actually program the functionality of something like a door opening, closing, or things like that? Well, that's done within this section here called the event graph. Alright, so let's create our first variable. You can see off the left-hand side, we kind of covered this already. This is components. This is where we'd add like a 3D model of our character, things like that. Below that, we have our event graph. That's what we're looking at here. And then within it, we have three events: event begin play, actor, and tick. We're going to get into events in a little bit more detail in a future tutorial, but for now, we're really more interested in going all the way down here to variables. Let's go ahead and hit the plus sign here, and we're going to create a new variable, and we're just going to call this player health. Now it's of type Boolean. If you remember, that stores a true and false or 0 and 1 value. We want to get an integer here. And notice we don't know really where to set the health, right? If I look over the right hand side here, it says please compile the blueprint. So if we compile the blueprint and we save it, now you can see that we can actually add a value. So let's go ahead and type in 100. Our player has full health. And for now, let's just go ahead and print this 100, the value that this variable is storing, to the screen. So I'm going to right click in here and I'm just going to type print. And you can see here we have a function called print string. Let's select it. And I'm going to go ahead and click this arrow to expand it. Now, within blueprints, we talked about this in a previous video or tutorial rather. You can see that each one of these has an execution. So I can connect my execution from here right into this other node. And now what's going to happen is that's going to connect this event which says begin play. And what this event does is when you press play on your game, the second the game starts, it's going to play or it's going to run the logic behind whatever node comes next. And that's this print string here. Inside of this print string, you can see it says in string hello. And duration, let's just set this for 10 seconds. And let's compile and save this and go back in our scene. Now you can see here that if we didn't have our BP my first blueprint, so let's go ahead and delete that, and I press play, nothing is printed to the terminal. But if I drag in BP my first blueprint, and I leave that in my scene and I press play, now we get hello. Because the primary function behind this print string node is to print certain values to the screen. A lot of times you'll use it for debugging or testing logic. So let's go ahead and grab our player health variable and let's drop it. And we want to get the value that's in player health. So I'm going to left click and select that. And I'm going to wire that directly into my string here. Now what happened is the string data type is not the same as the integer. So what happened when we dragged that in there is it automatically converted an integer to the value of string so that it could print to the screen. If a little bit of this seems a bit confusing, don't worry, we're going to be doing this a lot and it'll eventually become second nature and all that good stuff. So let's compile and save this. And let's go ahead and go back to our level and let's press play. And you can see now we get 100. You can also modify or update the value. So here we have print string. And what I can do is I can grab my player health here and I could just drag it down here and I'm going to set the value. And you can see that this value is set to 0. So I'm going to go ahead and set that to 200. And I want to have that logic run because the way the execution nodes work is it's only going to run the nodes or the code that is connected in the execution logic. So what will happen here is we're going to begin play. We're going to print our 100 to the screen. We're going to set the value now to 200. And then what I want to do is I need to get the value again. So I'm going to grab my player health here. And I'm going to get the player health value because now that it's set. And then I'm just going to select this print string here, hit Control C, and then with my cursor out here, hit Control V. Wire that in, and then I'm going to reprint that value to the screen. So we're setting the value here to 200, so now it's worth 200. So that means this value here is now worth 200, and we're just grabbing that value, and we're going to pass it into the string. So let's actually do something else to kind of make this a little bit clearer. Let's make this duration 1, and what I'm going to do is add a delay node in here. And I'm going to let it delay for 1 second so that we see 100, then 200. That's what this delay node essentially does. Let's compile and save this. Now let's press play, and we get 100, and then we get 200. So that's essentially the basics of how to get and set a value and how we would create a simple integer variable inside of Unreal.